I like the God of the Bible, a very powerful being that with the snap of fingers creates the earth, the planets, the stars. A word, and there appear the animals, male and female, plants. Everything is already up and running exactly as we see it today. Then, those killjoys of scientists put their noses into it and began to see that beneath the Earth's surface there are thousands of layers, and calculated that to deposit them it took millions of years. And then in these layers there were bones of animals extinct by millions and millions of years. And then you have all these annoying scientific things such as radioactive decay, all things which take millions of years. Some sturdy believer in the God of the Bible tried to give an explanation, namely that when God created the earth, has done exactly as it is, with all those layers containing these old bones, just to make a joke to the scientists and let them waste time in pointless researches. Of course, there are not many people who believe in a God who is both omnipotent and a prankster, and at this point, the field of the believers has divided into two, the theist and the deist. According to the deists, God would have snapped his fingers to create the initial Big Bang 13 billion years ago. Then he went into retirement, leaving everything to carry on by itself in accordance with the laws of nature. That would explain a lot of things. For instance, the indifference of nature to suffering, particularly human suffering. But this leads to disadvantages for the established churches, who all work thanks to their function as intermediaries in the relationship of simple humans with God, carried out by special humans who have a direct relationship with the deity. It is clear that if priests are not involved, thanks to their daily prayers with God, to convince him to send rain and so on, why should people donate so much of their earnings to finance the church? Therefore, theists developed the theory of guided evolution. The idea is simple. Organs such as the eye or flowers, many other things, are extremely complicated. It is not possible that they are the product of a casual selection, which is by definition blind. So God intervened step by step, directing mutations, all the way through to man, the completion of nature. That's the moment. But this is in no way corresponds with the idea of the omnipotent God of the Bible. The universe was created 13 billion years ago in the form of hydrogen gas. Then, for billions of years, God has just put together stars, created supergiant stars who collapse in order to form the atoms of heavy elements. Our solar system is a third-generation star. For 6 billion years, gas and matter have just turned around in the universe to produce heavy elements. Then he formed the sun and the earth. Good. And then, for hundreds of millions of years, God tried and tried in order to combine proteins until he was able to form a long chain that had the ability to reproduce. Life. Not very good for someone who we imagine omnipotent and omniscient. Then it took him more hundreds of millions of years to form a living cell, and more hundreds of millions of years to produce multicellular beings, which for millions of years were just bubbles of cells that moved through contractions. That God had a good idea. If I do an internal structure of stiffer material incorporating calcium, to which the muscles can be anchored, then they can coordinate movement better. And here we have animals with an internal skeleton, and then within more hundreds of thousand years, we managed to get animals and plants out of the oceans. This is an image of an incompetent and ignorant scientist, a bumbler who tries and fails millions of times with the only advantage of having a lot of time available. Let's look at what it took him to make man. First, he had to invent flowers and fruits. That took him more than 3.5 billion years. There were animals that fed on plants, but normal plants are horrible to eat. A mass of cellulose of very little nutritional value. Herbivorous dinosaurs were basically huge stomachs on legs, where the plants were decomposed for days to extract the few nutrients. With the fruit, we have a substance of very high nutritional power, which means fast animals with small stomachs and the possibility of feeding a large brain. Only that the fruits were on trees, for which he took a sort of mice, made them climb trees, and adapted their bodies to arboreal life, creating the monkeys. Then he took monkeys and adapted them to walking on two legs on the branches, getting rid of the tail. But this was not good enough. Having created arboreal apes, he caused a rise of the land in East Africa, which transformed a tropical forest in a desert dotted with bushes laden with berries. So he changed the body of the apes and lived there. Legs became long, a bipedal walk developed, and hands adapted to collect berries from thorny bushes. These apes were very successful and dispersed through Europe, Asia, Africa. But in the end, for millions of years, nothing substantial happened. They were basically chimpanzees with long legs. Then he had a brilliant idea. He inserted a gene that made this chimpanzee very chatty. Chimpanzees are rather silent creatures. A few grunts every now and then, that's all we can expect from them. Of course, there are chattering animals. Birds, for example, chirp all the time. He had some experience. So, luckily, it was not too hard to have this idea. In any case, it took him several million years to have it. But once this gene was inserted, it had a snowball effect. The more talkative ones could better explain strategies for hunting, for war, were better at duping the girls. The most intelligent ones could have more children. In a couple of million years, the brain went from 200 cc to 1400 cc. Man at last. At this point, he began to have strange demands. All he could do before, which led him to this point, became forbidden. No more killing. No more lusting after other people's wives. At least that's what's written in the Bible. But which Bible? There is the Masoretic and the Samaritan Bible. There are 2,000 differences between them. Well, there are only 1,000 differences between the Masoretic Bible and the Septuagint Bible, written in Greek 300 years before Christ. This can only mean one thing. When in 700 after Christ, the Masoretes wrote their version, they retouched the text available to them in a way that made it much as possible with the Greek translation written 1,000 years before. I would like to share a personal experience with you. I took a course as an actor here in England called Instant Theatre, where the organizer has written hundreds of cards of sentences in 3 versions: short sentences, medium-length sentences, and longer sentences. The actor on the stage draw in turn these cards from a deck, one at a time, and read it in front of an audience. Although it may seem strange, the audience interprets these random sentences as part of a logical and rational conversation, just if they were a comedy written and structured by author. This is one of the functions of the brain that at all costs wants to find a logical and consequential sense in all events. Rereading the Bible after this experience, I realized that in writing the scriptures that has reached us, the editors have placed in sequential order the texts that have been handed down by oral tradition, that they consider sacred and therefore could not change. In this case, rather than bunches of cards, it was a collection of scrolls. By digging in the Middle East, we found Sumerian texts written on clay tablets, much older, which are clearly the inspiration of the stories of the Bible. That is, the Bible is a simplification of Sumerian texts. But they are also closely related to the stories about the adventures of the gods that circulated in the whole Mediterranean area. We can recognize that the children of the Elohim and of mortals correspond perfectly to the half-gods of the Greek tradition. We can imagine that those were the stories that tribesmen handed down from generation to generation, as stories told sitting around the fires in villages at night. Thus, tales such as Cain founded the city is a good story. Obviously, people around campfires used to tell stories of various characters who had founded cities, an absolutely normal thing. There were many tales of foundations of cities, just to mention Romulus and Remus who founded Rome, Dido who founded Carthage, and so on. In the biblical account, this episode is placed after the story of Adam and Eve, allegedly the first human beings. But this is totally out of place. After killing Adam, Cain went to the land of Nod. Nod. Who is this guy? Where he founded a city. But besides Cain, there were no other people to populate this city. Nor did it make any sense, the verse where God puts a mark on him so that those who met him would not kill him. Who would kill him if he was the only left of the children of Adam and Eve? Some say that the Elohim were characters in the flesh, some kind of big men with superpowers with whom the man had direct contacts. In our culture steeped in science fiction stories, someone suggests that they were interstellar travelers. Today's culture is totally different from that of 3,000 years ago. However, we can imagine the strong similarities between the relationship of humans of those times with the numerous gods of their pantheons with today's devotees of the saints. From the point of view of the devotees of, for example, St. Patrick or St. Anthony of Padua, saints are real persons who reside above the clouds next to the Almighty and keep an eye on us and lend an ear when God is too busy in other matters. And their task is to listen to the prayers of their believers and, so to say, pull the sleeve of the Almighty's jacket so that he changes the events to please their clients. You will find stories of people thoroughly convinced that St. Patrick has intervened directly to shelter the child from being hit by a car, or that he acted with his superpowers on cancer cells who have invaded the body of the believer and have destroyed them, or have saved a sailor from drowning. Suppose that there are inhabitants on Mars, and that they receive emails from the Earth containing these descriptions, without any other source of information. There is no doubt that they will feel that St. Patrick or St. Anthony are people in flesh and blood that wander among the believers, carrying out these wonderful feats. Obviously, you and I might have completely different opinions on this subject. But someone suggested that these burly men with superpowers have interfered directly in the biological constitution of human beings. Now, if we deal with literature, everything is questionable. Well, when it comes to DNA, we enter a scientific area which is dealt with by thousands of researchers all over the world. Here we enter the field of solid evidence rather than that of speculation. Analysis of human DNA has not identified any alien DNA in human cells. A family tree of all men have been drawn, and it is clear that from common ancestors dating back to 100 or 200,000 years ago, hundreds of human groups branched out because of geological isolation and the inevitable intervention of genetic mutations. In the various interpretations of supporters of alien visitors, they opportunely appear at the decisive moment of mutations, 2 million years ago, 300,000 years ago, 100,000, 50,000, some a few thousand years ago, just to help the Egyptians to build the pyramids. Obviously, they could do lots of different jobs, geneticists, architects, but how were these extraterrestrials produced? It is not clear why the bungling god that took such a long time to produce men on Earth was so much faster on other planets. They would be genetically compatible with us. That is, on other planets, God has used exactly the same chains of amino acids that's produced exactly the same cells, but has worked much faster. The ladies will excuse me for a slightly French reference. But we see that in a few years, man has made a progress that is nothing short of amazing in the field of medicine. Thanks to ultrasound, magnetic scanners, and X-rays, we can produce better and better images of the interior of the human body. Soon we'll be able to see something similar to those scenes in Star Trek where Dr. Bones has a scanner that allows him to have a three-dimensional image of the inside of the body. Now, these highly advanced aliens, according to the stories of those who have been abducted by extraterrestrials, in order to examine human beings, have not been able to find anything better than sticking a probe up his ass. All in all, I prefer the God of the Bible, who does everything in 6 days by snapping his fingers.